Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another best of edition of Big Hairy News. Good to be with you. Really enjoying not being here. I don't think I should say that. As I'm sitting in a cafe somewhere in Devonport right now, probably having a drink. Apologies. Yes, I know that's not a good shop front. The start of the show is the shop front, and that's not a good shop front. On tonight's show, we're going to be having a bit of a critique of Sean Plunket and how he. When I say abused, I don't mean physically, but was a disgusting piece of shit towards a person that he door stopped, which means got on the show without their permission. And he's doing this more and more at the moment. He's getting people on. It's actually against the Broadcasting Standards Authority to do this. So if you're working in mainstream media, you're not allowed to door stop someone, which means just putting them on the show, putting them on air without their permission. And he's done it at least twice, if not three times. And so he's a repugnant, horrible, disgusting piece of shit. And we'll have a look at that tonight. That'll be fun. From Waikato University, Professor Tom Roa on copywriting against cultural appropriation. That's coming up. I got another clip tonight with Dr. Anna Brooks talking about why cancelling the traffic light system, which happened, I guess, a month ago, is terrible for vulnerable communities. We're also, I've got a commentary piece in tonight's show as well. I was a boarder at Sacred Heart College, and then I worked at Sacred Heart College as a boarding master. I looked after the then fifth formers. What's that now? Year 11s. And so I have a bit of a perspective on how boarding schools work, both from being a boarder and working in a boarding school. So I'm speaking tonight to the Sam Uffindale situation when he was talking about what happened at King's when he was a boarder. So because I can see both sides of the boarding life, not both sides of his situation, I have a perspective on it, and that clip is playing tonight, as well as Susie Fergusson from Radio New Zealand being an absolute legend and holding Christopher Luxon's feet to the fire. That's in there as well. If you want to get involved, there's a couple of things you can do. One of the things, as you can see, scroll down across the bottom of your screen now, is we do have an audio podcast. If you're a fan of the audio podcast, then what would be really appreciative is if you rated and reviewed what we do, especially on Apple Podcasts. If you get us on Apple Podcasts, which used to be called iTunes, is now called Apple Podcast, then rate us and review us, because that helps with the algorithms and it helps other people find us. So because we're still fairly new and we're still sort of growing, we haven't had business mummy and daddy put $3 million into us yet. If you're out there, business mummy and daddy. We're growing very slowly, and the way you can support us is to tell people about it. So we have a hashtag, which is hashtag share our shit, and just tell people about us. Go on to Apple Podcasts, give us a rate and a review, and that helps our audio podcast kind of go up in the ratings for the algorithms to then find to suggest to other people. It's the same for clips that come out on YouTube or anything that I share on my Twitter feed, which will be very quiet this week, right? We'll be very quiet this week because of us being on holiday, but it is something that can help us, the way that you can help us. And the other way you can help us, if you like, is to get involved in our Patreon. We have a Patreon up and running, and we've got a good 20 or 30 patrons in there at the moment. Just a few. We've only been going for a couple of weeks. But there's 6 levels of Patreon that you can be, from as little as $5 a month. So it's, it's a cup of coffee, less than in some places of New Zealand, up to and including $250 a month. And at the moment, because we're new and we're small, this is the only source of funding we have. It's obviously not funding to pay for the product. We're sort of doing it off our own back at the moment. At some stage, we would love this to be a full-time gig. I would love to have 4 full-time employees, including me, so me and 3 others, churning out content all day, every day, but that's in the future. At the moment, we're probably past soft launch, but we're probably in still that launching stage. And one of the ways that people can help us offset some of the costs that are coming out of our back pockets is being a part of the Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hairy News if you want to get involved. All right. I think I've already told you what's coming up tonight. I've forgotten, my brain's a bit mush at the moment, because this is now the 4th one of these that I've recorded in the last 15 minutes. So apart from that, we'll just get into it, shall we? The best ofs for your Thursday. Cheer. So let's have a look at the conversation this morning. Now, remember, this has really started from, let's just make this small again and have a look. This has really started from the conversation, meaning the conversation, and the article that was written by Dr. Suze Wilson over Luxon's dilemma, when politics and morals don't match in response to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I'm fascinated to see some of Luxon's people here. I'm sorry, Luxon's people, slip of the tongue. Some of Plunket's people here, because what I would really like you to do is message me on the chat with what I've said that's wrong so far. Message me with the hole in my argument. I think you'll struggle personally, but go for it. Message me in the whole that you've heard in my synopsis so far, and Chewy's synopsis so far, of what Mr. Plunket's all about, what he says and what he does. I genuinely, I want to hear it. And, you know, even if it's got sweary words in it, we'll probably share it. All right. So here's the conversation from this morning. One thing you need to know, which funnily enough, the platform cut out, was...
it's a subtle edit, though.
Oh, it's a subtle edit.
Barely tell.
Is that the producer for the show phoned Suze Wilson. Suze said, oh, look, I don't have time. I'm just on the way to, it was a meeting or work or something. And then the next thing that happened was Suze's phone rang, and it was Sean Plunket phoning her live on air. So she had declined the interview, and then Plunket phoned her live on air. The bit that they've cut out is the part of the conversations which Suze told me about, probably still on their website, I guess, where she goes, is this live on air? But you haven't asked my permission to go live on air. And so that bit's, funnily enough, that's left out. I wonder if it's left out because it's bad form. Don't know about that. But let's have a listen.
I'm trying to get hold of Suze Wilson, who is a management lecturer at Massey University.
Can I say something else actually about technical thing? Hey, the platform, can you fucking get rid of those fisheye lenses? You look cheap and shitty. Like, for all the investment your investors have done, it looks horrific. Your actual technical skill set there and your layout is utterly shite. I'm doing this in the basement of my house with a 4K camera that looks 1,000 times better than what your shitty fisheye lens looks like. Sorry.
And it's basically written a hate letter to Chris Luxon and a love letter to Jacinda Ardern. I have your informed consent now?
What was that?
You do now,
Thank you.
I'd had to ask for it, which is not actually how it should work.
Okay. Can I ask you then, who asked you to write this piece that I think started in the conversation on Luxon's dilemma?
Okay, so challenging the academic on what's this all about? Who put you up to this? That's the first part.
Nobody asked me.
How did you get it published?
Because I pitched it to the publication, to the conversation, which I write for fairly frequently, because part of my role as an academic is to be engaged in public commentary.
Okay, a management academic, right? Not a political academic or a media academic?
So why do you think you're qualified to write something about Mr. Luxon? You're only involved with management. What's that all about?
Shitty.
Here we go.
Well, I'm a leadership scholar, and so I write about.
And hang on, boom! I'm a leadership scholar. He's the leader of the National Party. Boom! Mic drop.
Leadership in both organisational context and a political context, and I've been doing that for some time.
How long some time?
Oh, are you qualified? Is your qualifications? Have you been in the game for long enough?
Well, I completed my PhD in 2013, so I started my study for that in 2008. And before that, I actually was involved in leadership roles.
Can you just say, look, can you say this? Look at this shitty setup they've got. Look.
I was just looking at the extension cord.
Crappy warehouse.
Daisy chained extension cords.
And to be honest, this basically will do nothing to the sound because it's all projecting forward. I mean, I can't really see them. I normally have them on show. I've got my sound. I've got all of my walls completely covered here. This shitty little basement studio on. But look at this. Look at this pile of crap. If I was your investors, your conservative, non-sweary business mummy and daddy, I would want to get a second opinion on the studio, just between you and me.
Why would you have a rubbish bin in the shop?
What sort of leadership roles?
Oh, please give us your qualifications, because if you're not qualified well enough, what are you doing writing this?
So I was a Deputy Commissioner at the State Services Commission. I was General Manager of Human Resources at New Zealand Post. I was a Senior Manager at Ministry of Education and also MAF. I was President of the New Zealand University Students Association, President of the University of Canterbury Students Association, held a senior role in a trade union.
You see that grin there?
Okay, ever been a member of a political party?
Never.
Coming from the man who was the communications director for the top party?
Yeah, he did a fucking great job there too.
2.2%, I believe. But hang on. I mean, I would assume, now this is an assumption, that if you're the director of a political party, chances are you were a member. Do you think you could be a director? You maybe not, but someone who has public and definite allegiances to political parties, questioning someone else on their political allegiance like it's a weapon. Like, I'm going to weaponize this because if you're a member of the Labour Party, we're not going to take it seriously from someone who has worked for, been paid for by political parties.
Wind it back a little bit and look at his reaction when she says she was involved in student politics.
Yeah.
Canterbury Students Association, held a senior role in a trade union, those kinds of things.
Okay, ever been a member of a political party?
Never.
Never?
Never.
Wow, trade unionist, student politician, never been a member of a political party.
Also worked in management for more time than I ever worked for a trade union, so don't make assumptions on the basis of the
you've written your piece
have.
largely based on the Roe versus Wade hysteria.
Now, Chewy, I'm obviously operating the system here. I want you to be a little bit more cognizant of this than I am, and we'll check it at the end. I'm not saying necessarily exacting times. So really the interview hasn't started yet, right, about the actual conversation.
No, this is an interrogation.
Yeah. Just take a mental note, make some notes down, jot some times, whatever you want to do while I'm pausing and that kind of stuff, for how long he talks versus she talks on the free speech channel. The thing that the platform does is they say, well, come on and debate us. Come on, if you have a view that's different, that's fine. Come on and talk about it. Forget the platform, forget Sean Plunket. Think about having a conversation in a pub with someone like this. Would they be having a conversation with you from a different perspective, or would they be berating you and trying to shout you down? Just think about it from a personal perspective and see what you think.
Area that has affected New Zealand. Are you aware of the clear and unambiguous comments made by Christopher Luxon regarding the status quo on abortion law settings in New Zealand?
Yes, my article talks about how emphatic he's been in making those statements.
Yet you still say he has a dilemma. Why?
Because there's an obvious dilemma for a pro-choice person having to support abortion laws in New Zealand.
And for someone that is supposedly politically neutral, that definitely sounds like some editorializing in his questions there.
Well, the other thing is, the dilemma is, one of his dilemmas is, because he has denounced this. So this is the thing, right? This is why now Sean Plunket's being disingenuous, right? Because if Jacinda Ardern said something before the next election, he would not be saying, well, she's unequivocally said it, so we have to believe her. He'd be going, I don't believe her. I don't believe she's going to stick by that, because that wouldn't suit his political narrative. So if you're not going to allow it for, it's the hypocrisy of what will happen. Right, so what he's basically saying is, Mr. Luxon has said it, so you must trust him. If you don't trust him, then you're just doing a hit piece on him. I guarantee you there'll be times when now in the next election where he won't trust, he won't believe something that the left has said will or won't happen after the election. I guarantee it. In fact, I'm willing to put a slightly high wager on it.
He has a dilemma because his personal position is that he's anti-abortion. He's on record as accepting that a pro-choice position regards abortion as tantamount to murder. He's on record as stating that his faith is very important to him, and he's on record as also stating that he doesn't believe that matters of faith, that politicians should impose those issues on the wider public.
So I don't see any dilemma there.
Mate. Well, if you let me explain, the difficulty is that he's now prepared to put aside all of those issues on the basis of understanding that there just simply isn't public support for his position. And so what that shows us about his character is that he's more swayed towards a pragmatist position rather than a values-based position.
That's not a dilemma, that's a position.
Well, are you going to let me explain
He's
or
not
not?
even
Because
listening.
I do need to actually get to my meeting, and I think we're at our 3 minutes anyway.
Carry on.
Oh, so you're going to let me explain. Okay. So what he's done is he's made a series of statements which show overall that he's more of a pragmatist position than a values-based position. Now, no leader is going to be solely one nor the other, okay? And no person is going to be perfect. And politics is complicated. All of that really matters. But the dilemma is that he's shown to us that he is very quick to set aside something that presumably is a strongly held personal belief because of what is politically tenable. And that therefore raises the question that if the political landscape changes, will his position on abortion laws change? And then in my article, I cite a range of evidence that shows that we should not assume that the political dynamics in terms of people's attitudes toward these things will not in fact change.
So that was actually quite a, let's be honest, he gave her a good amount of time there to answer.
Yep.
And it's very clear what she's saying is, and this is clear in the article, that he's made his pragmatic position now based on what is tenable in society, what we society think. If society shifts, and if society was to become more conservative and more say that they would like to see some restrictions on abortion in New Zealand, then his dilemma is, would he shift with it? So it's quite a simple concept. Yeah. And I think it's perfectly fair that Mr. Luxon's being pragmatic right now based on populist politics, based on the population saying, don't you dare go near abortion. If when he's the leader, the population was to change that position, the society was to be more welcoming of a more conservative view, his dilemma is, would he then change his view? Now, I don't know whether Plunket's not getting it or just playing games, but that's crystal, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times, is politicians take positions and then often they review them, often when they're out of office, and they go, hey, look, I was wrong on this. I was wrong on marriage equality. I was wrong on this, that, and the other thing. There's nothing wrong with being a pragmatist as a politician. The problem is when you try to have a bob each way and go, I have deeply held beliefs and I have very strong beliefs that this is the very strong thing I believe it to be. And then literally, a couple of weeks later, you're like, well, I'm still not going to do anything about it though. He can't review it and say, hey, look, I've listened to what the electorate have said and I understand the position that puts me in. I'd have more respect from him if he said that.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think we've said it many, many times. People like John Key and that who kept I personally benefited from interest-free student loans and working for families, but I would have respected John Key more to come in to actually be honest and say, these are not national policies, we're getting rid of them. But he had to play the populist game, and I respect him less for it because he wouldn't actually go, well, this is what National stands for, this is what Labor stands for. If you want that, vote Labor. If you want this, vote us. He basically adopted a bunch of Labor policies because he wanted to get in.
And I have that exact problem with Labor now, is that I want them to be more Labor instead of where they are in the middle, where they're like, well, we're a bit Labor, but we're also a bit national. Vote for us.
And let's keep going on this because we are going to be here. We definitely don't want to be here beyond midnight. We've still got the interview to come, and I'm cool with that. I'm absolutely fine to leave it running and keep on going, but let's keep going with the Inquisition of the Hour, because it kind of starts now, I think.
It seemed to me, to be honest, Suze, any different than the Prime Minister's ambiguous stance on marijuana law reform.
So this is now called whataboutism.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point.
What about, but hang on. What about what the Prime Minister said? And why didn't you write about this in your article? And the reason is that wasn't the topic she was writing about. She was writing about the dilemma for Luxon. He brings up Nanai Mahuta later on. What about? But he wasn't writing about Nanai Mahuta.
Where she was exactly the same as Luxon.
No, she wasn't exactly the same, and let me explain why. So firstly, abortion versus marijuana are not matters of the same moral weight. Okay? Not in any way, shape or form.
Who says?
She said just then.
Well, because
that's her academic position.
Engage in some moral reasoning for a moment, shall we? The argument from the pro-choice lobby is that abortion is tantamount to murder. And murder, I think we can all agree...
But Roe versus Wade has nothing to do with New Zealand, and Mr Luxon says it doesn't change anything according to his party.
Look,
so what I'm saying is... What I'm saying is you're engaged in a political narrative from a biased perspective.
No, that's bollocks. I'm just explaining the moral reasoning. There is no moral equivalence between a position in relation to cannabis law versus abortion.
Yeah, but surely your piece was about leadership, not the issue, because that's what you're an expert in, is leadership.
It wasn't about that.
Yeah, and
No.
I've explained what I've been trying to get to is the moral reasoning, the questions of character and integrity that his approach to this raises.
Which is just as
raises
questionable
questions.
as Jacinda Ardern's morally questionable position on marijuana law reform and her refusal to commit, in fact, stop some progressive legislation going through. Stop the referendum.
Whataboutism?
Well, she actually explained what her position on that was, which was
And
that she did
Luxon's
what was
actually explained
with
what
the
his
public.
position as well, but you don't seem interested in listening to what he has to say.
No, excuse me, I accepted those are his statements. What I
Are you
said
okay, Chewy?
is if the landscape changes,
Do you need a cuddle, Chewy? Are you okay?
can we trust that his position won't change?
So
given
basically you're
he
just
is showing
questioning his integrity from your personal position.
Yes.
Well, she doesn't say yes to this, but I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm questioning his character and his integrity.
Moral reasoning criteria and evidence.
Are you a lecturer in
that
morals
shows
or
us-
are you a lecturer in management and leadership?
I'm a lecturer in leadership.
So that's an interesting one, though. Are you a lecturer in morals or you're a
Because
lecturer in
leaders don't
leadership?
have morals.
But what qualifications does Mr. Plunket or anyone on the platform have to say to talk about morals or morality or any of those things? Are they qualified in it? See what I'm saying about that's the hypocrisy of the pompous, pious, communicator.
Which naturally involves me engaging in issues about ethical analysis, and I have published in the Journal of Business Ethics because quite a lot of my work engages with different philosophical traditions, different ethical traditions. I've also published work in the virtue ethics tradition. So actually I'm quite strongly grounded in ethical theory as part of my engagement with leadership.
Hang on, let me just mic drop. Just do that quickly and then keep going.
Research.
Any training in journalism?
Oof.
Why?
Yeah,
Why
why?
does that matter?
Interesting. Okay, do you get paid for that piece you wrote?
No.
Thank
What-
goodness for that.
And what would that matter?
Suze, I'll let you get to your meeting. Cheers. Suze Wilson there, author of a rather questionable piece published all over the left-wing woke media in New Zealand. Interesting.
We're gonna touch
Interesting.
on this
Didn't
point.
choose to raise the moral dilemma of Jacinda Ardern and the marijuana law reform. Why? Because she was doing a hit piece. She's a former student
Because she
politician,
wasn't
like
writing about
and
that.
ministers,
It also
former
happened
trade
years ago.
unionist, and she's had management
have a
roles,
listen.
all deeply rooted within the public service and bureaucracy of Wellington. I will let that interview and her attitude stand on its own merits.
So we're not going to watch the follow-up bit that they do and shoot. But here's something I wanted to say. So you heard him made a big deal about the left-wing media, and this is all over the left-wing media, and this is the left-wing position. And so Matthew Hooson was a staffer for the National Party until very recently. Was, I believe, an advisor or something for the New Conservative Party. I could be wrong on that, but I have seen some written up that he was involved with the New Conservative Party as a lobbyist, or that may be wrong. But there's no question that Matthew Hooson is a right wing commentator and a right wing lobbyist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hang on.
he was-
This is what he wrote, right? Remember what we've talked about. We've been a bit more abrupt with this, saying that we figure that if you are not trying everything you can to stop murder, you must be pro-murder. Tongue in cheek, but the question of that is the dilemma that he faces. So Suze said it in a different way. That's how we've said it. Here's what Matthew Hooton, right-wing lobbyist, right-wing commentator, right-wing political advisor, has said. Christopher Luxon can't possibly believe abortion is murder. If he does, he's a moral cretin, if not for the belief itself, then for failing to act upon it. If you think abortion is murder, you don't devote your life to selling deodorant in Canada or bums on seats in New Zealand. You immediately act to stop it. Matthew Hooton is a woke left-wing lunatic, according to Sean Plunket, because maybe arose by any other name, i.e. with different words. He's saying exactly what she said. She's saying exactly what we've been joking about for most of the week to do with Christopher Luxon being pro-murder. And it's the outlier here is Sean Plunket.
Yeah, like there's so much wrong with that ambush. There's so much from both just a fairness, free speech point of view, from a broadcasting standards, from a veteran broadcaster point of view. I have a serious dislike for just terminating the phone call and then going to editorialize what you think of this woman who just got called up out of the blue while she's trying to go to a meeting. Rather than going through channels and going, hey, I'd like to have a chat about this article. When's a good time? We can do a pre-record, whatever. There's just so much wrong with it. It's like he's an onion made of shit. Just every layer you peel off, it gets shittier. Like, and honestly, I have to say, it's not because he's blocked me on Twitter. That is hurtful, but I put that aside.
That's a bit of a problem around free speech, isn't it? He's stopping
just a little bit. And if I remember rightly, it goes back to him being the media advisor for Top. And I think because I thought Top had some good ideas. And I think I reached out to him and said something going, you are just screwing up every message that they have by being yourself.
Well, I wonder if it's because he wasn't getting paid by the government in his 2 jobs that have given him all his profile. That maybe, I mean, he worked for ZB for a while, didn't really seem to work there. He worked for, I think, Radio Live or Magic Talk for a while, didn't really seem to work there. So he started his own thing. It seems to me, and this is conjecture, but that the time he's found success is when he's been on the public teat.
And he's just surrounded himself with other people that have been sacked from things.
Let's have a look at a couple of things. Yeah, then we're going to go on to the interview, and I'm not sorry at all because I've enjoyed this out immensely. Funnily enough, though, just to say, we haven't had anyone come in and point out any of the holes in my argument yet, Chewy. I'm inviting that. I'm inviting people to point out the holes in my argument. Haven't had that yet, but. There was Twitter went a bit crazy today. In fact, it's still going crazy right now. My phone's buzzing all over the place. I'll just bring the screen back up again for people who are messaging both in support of the Sean Plunket situation and in support of Suze Wilson as well. I mean, Suze Wilson put out a tweet today, which I actually think was one of the sort of saddest indictments of, what Sean Plunket did. I'm just seeing if I can find it. I didn't have it loaded up. But basically she said, look, you work all your life, you pay all your bills, you pay all your taxes, you get qualified, and then you get told you're a virus that needs to leave the face of the planet. I'm just like, But what I wanted to do was just say, I just grabbed a couple of examples, because I think I say in this conversation with Suze, which we're going to play next, that the audience that Plunket is going for are the QAnon people. I'm not saying everyone who listens to Sean Plunket isn't QAnon, but they're the anti-vaxxer, hate Jacinda Ardern, QAnon part, and the thing is they're also easily monetizable because they're not very smart. I thought what I'd do is just grab a couple of people who have liked the tweets that have gone out supporting Sean Plunket, just to have a look at who he is, who is he pitching to. Here's one, and this is public domain because it's on Twitter. His name is Claude. He's a patriot, a Christian with pro-life values and a free thinker. Hate progressive. He's a free thinker. I'm a free thinker, but I hate progressive and liberal politics. But I'm a free speaker and a freedom junkie. And if you go through the feed of this random person I've selected, who is the people that Sean Plunket is pitching to, it is full of people faking photos between Zelensky and that Cassidy Hutchinson, I think her name was telling lies to the select committee. This
person works in a troll farm.
So and then I just picked another one at random. This person is called Dr Salty Kiwi. Free Israel, resign Jacinda, co-governance apartheid, end male food poverty. I'm not sure what that one is, and it's all the same. I don't know. Maybe his missus isn't feeding him enough. If he's indeed got a missus, he might be an incel. But the first kind of tweet here. The first thing about the new Maori Health Authority is they changed their name. Fucking muppets. So you don't take it too seriously. People who have sprang up to defend Suze. Those are the people that Sean Plunket is speaking to. And someone said it so well in the tweets before about, isn't it funny, all of those people who want free speech are the ones that adhere to a lot of hate speech ideology. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's his audience, right? And part of me kind of goes, you go and have them. Go and have them. You can all make a little incel group, somewhere in Wellington.
That's
and
called Telegram.
Telegram, or
Telegram.
or I was going to say, or Boomer. What's the other one called? Boomerang? Or there's a B one as well. I can't think of it right now.
A social media platform called Boomer, centered around Sean Plunket. Sounds like genius.
But that's his audience, right? That's the audience of the platform. And when I put out a tweet that I was going to talk to Suze tonight about her article, which is kind of what we want to do, and also about the Sean Plunket experience, they came out of the woodwork. It was kind of hilarious. Chewy, you messaged me saying, what a bunch of bullying fuckwits. I know you said cunts, didn't you? Or something.
Yes, I did say cunts.
I found it mostly hilarious.
But it's also, it's straight misogyny.
Yeah.
Like, that's always been Plunket's thing, that he picks on women. He doesn't like Jacinda because she's a woman. He's berated this woman that he's called out of the blue on his little platform. Women were going to destroy New Zealand rugby.
You have to be careful with a little bit because they're bigger than us, but that's not saying much.
What is it going to be like Anchorman, where we fight in a car park?
We are the skinniest kids. We are the skinniest kids at Fat Camp in this whole world of public commentary. So they're fatter than us, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, it's that. But I don't want that audience. Like we've said about Mr. Luxon when he had those racist statements on his Facebook page, and he came out going, "Oh, they weren't even saying anything anti-Māori. They were saying it towards me, and they were saying it to you, Mr. Luxon, because you're married, because you used Māori, because you spoke the Māori language, so they attacked you. If you hadn't spoken the Māori language, they wouldn't have attacked you. So what they're doing is attacking the Māori language that you used." The only correct response from that is for Mr. Luxon to go, "If you truly believe that Te Reo should never be spoken in this land, then National does not want your vote." But know what that is? That's one of Luxon's dilemmas, because he wants their vote, he needs their vote, but he can't be seen to be endorsing their racist views. Again, for people who are just joining us, I'm not saying National voters are racist. I'm saying if you're a white supremacist, if that's your ideology, if you're someone that thinks the bloody Maoris are getting too much or whatever, then the likely place you vote is on the right. You don't get too many people who are anti-co-governance on the left so much. I mean, you do, because it can come down to assets, and there's actually some good arguments for there, but it's not the arguments that people like Sean Plunket and his followers are typically putting out there. From the School of Māori and Indigenous Studies at Waikato University, Associate Professor Tom Roa joins us. Tom, g'day. Thanks for joining us. Hello. How are you? Kia ora.
Kia ora. Good to be here again, Pat.
Yeah, great to have you, man. Listen, we had a chat the other night about this story, and I'm calling it an interesting story because it's interesting to me. Hopefully that's not I'm not trying to diminish the importance of the story, about this German artist whose name is Gerd Stritzel, who has been to New Zealand, it would appear, as a tourist, who has a bit of a passion or a love or an affinity for Aotearoa New Zealand. And as a part of that, he has done some art, specifically of Rangi McLean, and is selling it on the open market in Europe. And the response from Tūhoe is a copyright notice, a copyright infringement notice. So we sort of clunkily talked a bit about it, like, how do you copyright someone's image? If someone was doing a painting of Jacinda Ardern or of Joe Biden or of Shane Warne or of Richie McCaw, they'd probably sell it and there wouldn't be any conversation around it. But we don't have any understanding or experience or knowledge of the cultural aspect of this as well. So we thought, let's get on an expert, which is what we love to do, who is far more knowledgeable than us. And we can talk about what it all means and how it plays out and what it means to Māori and what it means to, have your image done and potentially commercialized. So that's sort of what we've grabbed you. So I guess first of all, we'll just throw the ball to you and say, what are your thoughts around the story? What are your thoughts around the situation?
Well, in the encountering of cultures, there's always this dynamic about what one culture expects of another in the encounter, and this gentleman clearly, from what I see in the article, claims to have an affinity for Māori and claims to be caught in aspects of the Māori world
Mhm.
that excite him, and that's all well and good. However, in the Māori world, using someone else's image and using that image of, in particular, the head.
Okay.
And you'll see with Rangi's head and the mataora, the tāmoko, gives that head another tapu, another special character. If this gentleman is caught in that an affinity with the Māori world, seeking firstly an engagement with the person is the proper thing to do. And I don't know that this gentleman has done that.
No, I think it's fairly obvious he hasn't. I think that
Yeah.
he's done the image, done the painting, had pushback, and then approached people afterwards. That's how I read the story, at least.
Yes. So we have this dynamic that in the Western world, you can take a photo of something, and that photograph is your property. But however, there's another aspect in who does that image actually belong to.
Yeah.
I know that there's a real dynamic in the Māori world and the Western world with this thing of ownership. Now, in Māori, there is no actual word for own,
Right.
because ownership implies that you have the control over that thing. You can sell it, you can do what you like with it. But in the Māori world, there's no such concept.
Mm.
And this idea of tapu and mana. Let's go firstly to the mana of this image. Rangi McLean's mana is in his image, and so to use that mana to make money is an aspect of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just not part of the Māori psyche. It has become part of our psyche, in fact, because of the colonization, and we do have this understanding today. But there's still that lingering of not owning. And we have the same thing in how we treat our land, how we treat our environment, how we treat each other. We can't own each other. We can't own the land, because the land is us and we belong to the land. The land belongs to us. It's an idea of belonging, not of owning. So that implication that when you own something, you can do what you will with it. And so the power is with the person who owns. And we have these conversations now in terms of the three waters and the other land legislations. And it's thank you to the Tūhoe people and the Whanganui people, in that the river is a legal entity with its own mana. It has its own personality. It has its own right of being. And that the Whanganui people are the kaitiaki. They look after the rights of that river for having its own being. Same with the forest, the Urewera forest. And the Tūhoe people have shown that they care for the forest. They belong to the forest and the forest belongs to them. But the forest has its own right of being, R-I-G-H-T.
Yeah.
And it can't be owned. It has its own mana. So this ownership of this image, I suggest this German gentleman doesn't understand. And if he has an affinity with things Māori, then let him consider what he is actually doing here. He's trampling on Rangi McLean's mana. He's trampling on the mana of Rangi's people, because that moko and that image belongs to the people. So,
that's right. Tom, do you think, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying on some level is the transference of finances, of money, is one of the, if you had it like, what is it, how do you define owning something? It sounds like with the transference of money, that gives ownership to something. If this gentleman had done this painting and say gifted it to a local, in Germany, but to a local museum, had no money transfer of hands, and there was a display and it was in a museum, that sort of thing, would it be any different? Would it be any different to how it feels to Māori?
well, there's another step in this, and that step is the approach to the people to whom that image belongs, the person to whom that image belongs. And if Rangi, for example, felt honored with that, and I mean the images of the kaumatua, the ancestors that Goldie painted, they sat willingly for Goldie. And now those paintings are worth millions of dollars. I mean, there's another aspect of that missing, because how do the people, the descendants of those ancestors, benefit from the use of that image that is actually a part of their mana, a part of their reason for being? So this gentleman doesn't appear to have an understanding of that. And should Rangi give a permission and say, yes, that'd be good, put it up in a museum so that this can be seen freely by others, but then others can take photographs of that and then use those photographs in their own way to do other things. So there's all of that commerciality, and this ownership of that again implies financial gain is difficult. It's very difficult.
I think the idea, you just use the word commercial, the commercialization of it. I think that in the law, that seems very clear, using the likeness of someone to make money off it and basically cutting them out. I mean, and I think about in a literal commercial sense, I couldn't put an All Blacks image on the front of my podcast saying, look who supports my podcast. There is a commercial entity there. But I can see in this as well, this German artist has painted, obviously it's identifiable as to who it is because of the moko and because of just the image itself, to then sell it for thousands of dollars. That seems to be quite obviously a legal situation where the use of someone's likeness for financial gain, there should be a copyright claim there. I think I see that really clearly. I guess what's more interesting to try and work out is the kind of adherence to sort of, can I put it as the cultural respect aspects of this? Because I guess without sounding harsh, someone in Germany doesn't have to pay any cultural respect at all to any other person from any other part of the world. But I guess within the art community, this guy's getting a lot of pushback from people saying you should be paying adherence to that respect as well. Do you have any understanding? Has Tuhoi approached him based on the sort of legality of someone's likeness to make a financial gain, or have they approached him in a copyright sense on our cultural property? And is there any difference of those two things in like a legal setting?
I think too have done the right thing, that they've approached this from a legal copyright question, again a question of law.
Yeah.
But the deeper concern for me is this appropriation by this gentleman who claims an affinity, who claims to have an emotion for this image and for the people, for the person portrayed, and for the people to whom the imaging belongs. And this is incongruent to me.
Yeah. Do you know if there's any legal recourse for like cultural appropriation? I mean, we hear about that a lot, and one of the examples the world knows about is like don't wear Native American headdresses. That's a fairly common one that's talked about, especially because it seemed to be quite fashionable, or it was at one stage. Is there any legal recourse for cultural appropriation, or is that more a societal pushback, and the only legal recourse is that, you know, financial gain off someone's likeness? I mean, do we need to have something in law where cultural appropriation there can be some legal recourse against that if it's currently not?
Thank you, Pat. That's something that the Waitangi Tribunal,
Yeah,
in the report Aotearoa Tēnei, recommended that there actually be that redress, but our court systems and the legality of that is such a maelstrom of it's really difficult. So we again, in particular in terms of this German gentleman, appeal to the ethic of the artist and of his art, that cultural misappropriation is so morally actually offensive. And I don't know that that point has been made strongly enough to this gentleman.
Just quietly, as you're talking about this, I have had a quick look at his Instagram page, and maybe he has gotten up to play with it. I'm pretty sure this is the same account. The reason I'm saying pretty sure is it looks like the image has been taken down.
Good.
I mean, I have to double check that I've got the right person. I've gone back weeks now, but it's a German artist with the same name. I'm assuming it is him, and it looks like perhaps he has his, can I say his ethics? I'm not sure how to quite word it, but have kicked in, and then now appears to have been that image which had his explanation on it is now taken off his Instagram. So maybe, Tom, maybe both the legal and perhaps the moral aspect of this conversation have come to a head, and maybe he's withdrawn his desire to sell the image of Rangi.
Nice.
And I've literally just found that out now. So I'll chase that up, and when we replay this conversation tonight, I'll confirm all of that. But it looks like maybe there's a positive outcome after all.
Yeah. In a couple of weeks, we have the Māori Kings, the celebration of the Māori Kings Koroneihanga, and I'm sure Rangi will be there.
Yep.
And I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation amongst a number of us.
Yep.
So that will be also very interesting, how that might track.
Very good. From the Māori and Indigenous Studies Department, Associate Professor Tom Roa, Waikato University. Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Kia ora, Pat.
I sent some images, some texts around to some people today, as I talked about earlier. One of the people I sent a text to say, you know, officially on the record, what will you be doing tomorrow was Dr. Brooks. And I can only say that I got a fiery response from Dr. Anna Brooks. So I think that I said to her, Anna, why don't you come on and talk about it? Hi there. How are you? Welcome.
Me? Fiery?
Well, I looked at it, and I won't say what you said because we want to talk about it, but yeah, a fairly firm response. So before I ask you that question, and I've actually got responses from Susie Wiles and David Welch as well, which we can have a look at what they said they'd be doing tomorrow at the supermarket, so to speak. Tell us about the decision today. Where are you sitting on it? What are your thoughts?
Complete disregard for the vulnerable is where I'm sitting. You know, we all sort of knew that this situation would come, you know, that restrictions would drop. But it's one thing to, you know, to expect restrictions to drop, but it's another thing entirely for there to be no systems in place to protect the vulnerable, like none. So there's been no advancement in making sure that our air spaces are well ventilated. Basically, vulnerable people have been dodging, public places to date, and now they're really locked up. Mm-hmm. Now they have zero choice. They can't even go to a supermarket safely. So it's really distressing in the vulnerable communities. So no, I guess that the most frustrating part of all this is it's this big focus on death again. Yes, case numbers are coming down, and that's great, and so is, you know, the mortality. But there's complete disregard and like no discussion about long COVID, about the impacts of getting infected. So the other things that I find very frustrating about today is, you were just discussing booster shots. What about those of us under 50 who would like to be protected right now because our immunity is waning? Should that not have been something that was widely accessible before, you know, we throw away our masks and, be completely vulnerable? This virus finds the vectors it needs. And there's no denying that. So, you know, when we hear about the wall of immunity and on all these, you know, catchphrases about why the cases are coming down. Yes, that's happening, but we've still got cases. The cases are infecting people who have not been infected. That is what's happening. And, you know, and the great thing is yes, the boosters do add that layer of protection. You hear about it anecdotally. The pockets that are happening right now are people who have not been infected before, and it's getting them. And the people who aren't getting the infections, they may have already had it and they might be boosted. There is a layer of protection there. So if you take away all of these protections, I mean, you know, getting on a plane with everyone surrounded you without a mask on a bus, you know, all of these things now, your layer of protection has vanished. So I think it's tough. I think, you know, it was a complete disregard. And hearing words like, now that we're going to have clarity for the vulnerable, that they've been forgotten.
I also wondered, and I don't know if you know the answer to this exactly, but when the Prime Minister says, you know, in consultation with health officials, we've made this decision, who are they speaking to? Good
question. No one in the vulnerable communities got a look in. You know, there's as I say, there's been no discussions about, you know, those impacted by long COVID. And what we're seeing come out, through the research is that people with long COVID are more likely to get reinfected, you know, like as in we're sort of seeing that happening. I mean, okay, it's a little bit anecdotal at this point, but, you know, that the studies coming out and the children especially were sort of showing that, you know, you may have got, you know, gone through a recovery phase with your long COVID, and then a reinfection happens and boom, everything comes screaming back again. It's just one of those things that's just not getting spoken about, you know, the vulnerabilities of repeat infections.
How could they been the government made this decision? How could this have happened without that concern? I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not saying this like it makes it okay, but isn't there a reality that the vulnerable are always going to be vulnerable? And if there's a chance of catching it, it's always going to be a situation. Like how would, if you were advising the PM, what would you have said about what would you need to see to go to this, let's get rid of the traffic lights?
Well, yeah, it is like a lot of the experts are saying, we need a new normal. We don't need to go back to 2019. We need to normalize safe airspace. We need, every event we host or hold where we're in confined spaces, if it's ventilated, it's going to be safer. All of those layers of protection we haven't seen change. So you're right, like as in vulnerable people will continue to be vulnerable, but I think there has been no noises or sort of strong messaging to actually make change within our businesses or our workplaces or whatever. So, so we're facing, as soon as the announcement came, I'm a university lecturer, the ripples started coming through. What do we feel about going back to lecturing with no masks? And, we've just come out of mid-semester break, and the week before, 2 COVID cases in my class. And, and I felt safe because we were all masking.
Yeah, right.
What happens next? We all get infected if we're vulnerable. And that's the thing, the different demographics that are in classrooms, or, if you haven't had it, and this is the thing, if you have not had COVID, it's going to, it finds the vulnerable person or the person it can infect, doesn't it? That's just how these waves happen. So those are the things that are alarming to us, is that everyone has the right to education. Everyone has the right to a safe workplace. What have we done to protect those rights? And the answer seems very little, like that nothing's changed.
Yeah, I've learned quite a bit about like carbon dioxide parts per million in the last few weeks. There's this community group in Dunedin who did some work in my house, and one of the things they've asked is, from doing the work in the house, can they install this? It's basically a sensor for them to get data on the houses they're doing work in. I'm like, yeah, of course you can, and I've got a link for it. And so I can go and have a look at it, and I can have a look at things like the moisture in the house. And one of the things is parts per million of carbon dioxide. And I mean, again, you're the expert here, but my understanding is outside is about 300 to 400 parts per million of CO2 in the outside air. And if you're inside and it gets above 800, that's time to open up the doors and kind of air the place out. Watching the graph of my house, around 9:30, 10:30 at night, when everyone's going to bed, it spikes up over 800. During the day, when I'm home by myself working, it's down around 300. So when I've got that visual representation now, I understand it a bit more about if the 800 parts per million, is the kind of danger time for the virus to be spread around, how easy it is to get there. I've heard other stories of people at workplaces who will carry around their own little kind of portable CO2 monitors, and they put them on the middle of the desks while they're talking. And if it goes up to like 600-700, that's when they open up the windows. They let it go down, and they close the windows, and they keep talking. Is that a realistic kind of expectation? Is that where we actually need to go in society? As in a way, not because I was also thinking, cough, colds, and flus, that would help just with that as well. But is that sort of what we need to move towards?
Of course. We need to normalize that it's a great thing to breathe in safe air. And that's what we've been sort of trying to push the message on, since we sort of said that vaccines aren't enough. Because, of course, we also weren't sort of saying that, we should mask forevermore either. No one wants that, but a mask should be your added layer of protection if you're not safe in the airspace that you're in. So if we start with the air around us and start monitoring that and making that safe, then yes, of course, requirements for masking is going to plummet. And as you say, if your air is clean, it's good for education. It's good, for your brain to have clean air. It's good for schools, all of those things. So that's what we were sort of hoping, that, that society would sort of change and there'd be pressures for our airspace, just like we don't drink dirty water. So those are the things that a lot of the experts actually calling for was better ventilation, so that, we would stop getting respiratory viruses in general. And
it's such a hard thing to put in place, though, because it's retrospective, isn't it? It's like trying to build infrastructure within a city that already exists. Like, how do you fix Auckland's transport problems? You already have the restrictions. How do you do the ventilation, in the middle of winter here in Dunedin, when it's literally last week snowing outside? It sort of feels like it needs to be some kind of system within the building, but then that's an installation of something that's a cost. It sounds like if you are building a new house, it seems like this is one of the new things that you should put on your tick list. How do you work with ventilation? But if you're living in like me, a 1960 house, it'd be we do have an HRV system, but that's only an aspect of it. Actual proper ventilation for this situation is something to try and think, how's it a practical application, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. But this isn't a one-time event.
Yeah.
Today it sounded like, woo, COVID's over, and the virus wasn't consulted. The virus, the virus didn't decide that today's the day it's going to just shuffle off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like we've just, as a nation, have decided it's time to, let it rip round who hasn't had it yet. And the thing is we know that more variants are likely, more waves are likely, all of those things are likely. And so the more that we prepare, now's the time to prepare. Preparing for something, you do it yesterday. So, preparing for the future, that this is respiratory viruses are here to stay. And the more that we can prevent them and prevent illness, the better. And despite, the more that we ignore this pandemic, again, the virus doesn't care. And, it's going to get people on their second or third infection, and that's going to put them in bed, and that's going to give them their long COVID or their heart problem or their neurological condition. Like just ignoring that this virus causes long-term impacts doesn't make it go away. It just makes those long-term impacts even harder to educate on, because nobody thinks that they exist and nobody wants to listen.
My health hobs has just kind of also put out sort of what you're talking about, the vulnerable. My health hob says I live with 2 immunocompromised people. For me, lockdown starts now, gutted.
Yeah,
I guess that's kind of speaking to what you're talking about.
Exactly. And this is what we've been advocating for such a long time now. Nobody lives in an environment, in a site, in their own little bubble. We've got children at schools.
Yeah.
There'll be families impacted everywhere where they don't feel that it's safe for their children to go to school now, because it might not be the child. It could be the parent, the grandparent, whoever's living in that household that's vulnerable. So we've now just been anyone who is vulnerable, and whether that's vulnerable clinically or immunocompromised, immunosuppressed, or not vaccinated. We can't forget that under 5s aren't vaccinated. Some of our youth aren't boosted, and as we just spoke about, under 50s still don't have access to the 4th boost. I would have liked to have seen all of those things, like as in tick as many boxes or as protected as you can be before all of these protections stopped. I would have liked a 4th boost. And I think you were talking about this before. If you look up online, we're not eligible. But there's a few rumors going around that, I'm pretty certain I was offered it a few weeks ago. And I was like, well, I'm not eligible yet.
Well, like out the back of a station wagon or something. Hey,
Yeah,
got a vaccine? Want a vaccine?
It was actually in a pharmacy.
Okay.
So there was a slight. I'm pretty certain the pharmacist said, "Oh, I can give it to you now if you want." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not eligible." So those
Did you take? Were you insulted? Were they saying you look over 50? Is that what I was saying?
Yeah, exactly. What are you saying? I was like, what? Yeah, so I was not eligible, and so that was that. But because there's loads of people that are vulnerable that would absolutely take up a 4th boost if it gave them that layer of protection. And so, and is there mixed messages out there? Is it accessible if you went and asked for it? I don't really know. I'm just pretty certain that I was offered it because I look 50, clearly.
Hey, Anna, this question is the question I sent you, and I'm asking several people today, and shortly I'll show you Dr. David Welsh's and Susie Wiles's answer where they texted back to me. But so today, right, you're at the supermarket today, under the current regulations, must wear a mask, etc. You're going to the supermarket tomorrow, Anna. Are you changing any of your habits? Are you changing any of your practice?
No, masking all the way. And the one thing that I just will find completely frightening is public transport, like getting on an aeroplane. I just saw a messaging just before about, the fact that, planes are saying, our airlines are saying, yay, no more masking. It's like, is that the next one going to be, yay, no more staff? They're all sick with COVID.
No more flights.
No more flights. Oh, we're going to cancel all your holidays because there's no staff. So that's the thing. That's what masking does. It keeps people in business. And so,
true.
of course, yes, the cases are coming down, but that's just because, we had safety precautions. If a whole plane is now all bets are off, there might be a staff member on every plane that is exposed daily. So no, masking needs to be there. We in these circumstances that don't feel safe.
Coming to Auckland in the first week of October, I will be wearing my mask in the plane, no question. I've sort of thought about it today. I thought, I think maybe not everyone, Anna, you're probably perfect, but many of us have have increased our risk somewhat in some places, sensible risks. Yeah. But I still think that if I was to go into a place that was closed off, lots of people, close quarters, at today or tomorrow, I should say, I probably will still wear a mask. I think that would be my practice. Yeah. So, and then a plane is one of those places.
A plane is definitely one of those places, and I think the places that is going to be hardest to be a part of with low masking events, like whether that's work events, where you're all in a confined space, or entertainment. I mean, okay, people have been going to bars for a while now, but we've had conferences and where masking is required. Are we going to start seeing hosts of events not put masking? Please mask if you can, because now it's not a requirement. It's not going to get asked, is it? So I think we're going to see all of those things dissolve away, which is going to lead to more and more infections rippling around. It might not shoot up our case numbers, but it's going to ripple around because that's the places that the virus spreads.
Okay, so this is the response from Dr. David Welch. You might be interested to see this as well, Anna. So same question to him, are you going to change your behaviors tomorrow? His response was, I've been easing off in my mask use the last couple of weeks with low numbers, but still wearing it in class and in meetings at work. So no immediate change. We'll probably keep it on in shops too, especially if they're busy. That's sort of what I'm saying in those confined spaces. Dr. David Welsh says that. Susie Wiles as well. I asked her, and she says, I'm definitely not changing my behavior, and I'm going to be watching the COVID wastewater data to see how the prevalence is changing. Apologies for those. I was putting this together at 2 minutes to 10. I should have spread those out better. But so keeping an eye on the wastewater. So I guess kind of doing your own numbers to see if looks like cases are going up officially via wastewater, which is probably the best way to look at things now, isn't it? Because people who aren't reporting. So that means out of the 5 people I approached, and I did ask Michael Baker as well, but obviously busy man, didn't hear back from him. So this is the list of people I've been talking to. You, Michael Plank, Susie Wiles, David Welsh, all basically saying not going to change mask usage tomorrow from today, which I think is telling, because as we've said all the way through this, we want to speak to the people at the pointy end, not being conspiracy theorists about the ninth floor of the beehive, but the people in the labs, I think, have better advice perhaps than the people on the ninth floor are giving out, especially when they say things like it's now safe to go out and do this rather than safer. Might be safer than it was 6 weeks ago, but it's not necessarily. That absolute word certainly changes the vibe of what that feels like.
And using the word certainty, I think, was a giant stretch. Like that summer is going to bring us certainty.
Yeah.
Because
no
COVID
events being cancelled.
Yeah, because COVID knows to not encroach on our summer now.
Yeah.
So we've looked into the crystal ball, and there's going to be certainty. Yeah. And and we're going to get over our so-called COVID anxiety over summer. I mean, all of those things were just really deflating things to hear. For the vulnerable communities who have been battling away in their own self-isolation, trying their best to avoid infection, and now all bets are off, in a lot of these environments. I mean, in retaining masks in healthcare settings, yay. I mean, is that not just logic? So,
I was interested. I read, and I know you and I, Anna, have been talking about the orange situation with masks in schools, but I was really interested to read last week. I got a bit annoyed actually because there was principals talking about now that they've brought masks back into schools, all of a sudden a whole bunch of the kids weren't getting sick. And I was just like, oh, Like now that we've decided to bring them back in the last like 2 months, it's like all of a sudden we've got a roll of 83 to 95% again, not down at 46%, like we keep getting told by Christopher Luxon.
I know. It's magic, isn't it? You know,
It is magic.
Yeah, it's totally magic that masks help this. And okay, you know, we do have summer on our side and the warmer weather coming, but we also know that that doesn't actually prevent the waves. You know, all the other countries that have been through summers have had waves. We're just following suit that we're going to pretend that, you know, that people, that death's not happening and that people aren't getting long COVID. All of those things are going to go on behind the scenes with no real reflection on, you know, that the things aren't changing.
Cool. Dr. Anna Brooks. Anna, thanks for joining us again. It was nice to get you in for a bit. I felt like your text was more fiery than our conversation. I was waiting for the flame to come out, but that was good. As you're being professional and more reserved, perhaps. But you know, if you want to yell at me on the text anytime, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. Cool.
Thanks, Anna.
Awesome.
All the best, mate. We're going to have a look now. There was a very interesting piece written by Alice Stewart at RNZ. Here it is. Here's the piece by Alice Stewart. Uffindale in the era of boarding school bullies. Now, because I'm partly dyslexic and I like to hear things. Actually, on Today FM, I think it was Rachel Smalley talked about it. So we're actually going to listen to Rachel Smalley. It's like we're going to have the audiobook version. Rachel Smalley talking about this article. But there's one thing that's really important. And if you've been following me the last couple of nights, you'll know I've said a few times I was at boarding school in 1990, Sacred Heart College in Auckland. King's College was across the way. I can guarantee you, I know of people, I knew people at King's boarding school. So this is in the 90s. And there was, and I'll use the phrase again that I used the other night, and, you know, trigger warnings. It doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. There's this thing called fagging. And fagging is an old term from way back in the 1700s in England, where senior boarders basically get to act as the bosses of the junior boarders. The junior boarders basically become their slaves, for want of a better word. And that
sounds terrible.
That was still happening in King's in 1990. Certainly in the early 90s. And so, of course, what comes with that when you're dealing with 16-year-olds who still haven't had their frontal lobes developed is power comes in and they treat them like utter trash. And there are allegations around the world, this has nothing to do with King's or any other boarding school, that often leads to things like sexual stuff as well. So it's a disgusting, this is probably one of the reasons that I reacted so badly to this at the start of the week, is that I was a boarder at Sacred Heart College, and it was an amazing place. None of this shit went on. All great guys. I'm not saying everyone had a fantastic time there. I'm sure there was bullying that happened, you know, run-of-the-mill bullying, not to minimize it, but none of this crap went on. And he's the quintessential example of that kind of person who thinks it's hilarious, who's entitled to his sixth form position, that now he gets to treat the third formers like shit because that's the way it's always been. And that's the thing. So let's have a listen to Rachel Smalley and what she says about the article that we were just looking at. And she's telling the story of some boarders in the 90s at King's, right? And those are the stories that you can read in this article. But we're going to do the audiobook version of that.
So Ella talks to David. He was 12 years old when he entered King's in 1993. On his first night, his very first night, the older kids arrived in groups. These are 15 and 16-year-olds with socks full of tennis or golf balls. And they would hit the younger kids, the new boarders who were half their size, just left home, and leave them covered in bruises. I guess it was some sort of initiation. And David said a punch here and there, or a kick, or someone gets shoved down the stairs or cornered and threatened. That was pretty regular. It was a pretty regular sort of thing, he said. And he says more than anything, he was affected by the culture of fear that violence created. He says there was always a threat and you would never really feel safe, especially if you weren't a jock or on the first 15 rugby team. On a few occasions, he remembers being cornered in the stairwell, called a faggot, and then punched in the face, leaving him with a split lip. In those situations, you just have to choose, he said, between escalating it and defending yourself or just taking it. David said he always just took it instead of fighting back, because if he narked, he said it would make it worse. There was always an undercurrent of violence, and there was always that kind of fear. The kids who were sporty were always first-class citizens, and everyone else was meat for the grinder. Another boy, Simon, said he was filling in as a dorm prefect one night, and they were entrusted to look after the young boys. And he said one night a group of 20 16-year-olds arrived.
Now, think about that. A group of 20.
Yeah.
Now, that also speaks to the staff of King's in that time cannot have not known about this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I've been a boarder at a boarding school. It is impossible for, and I'll tell you something else I haven't said. I've actually worked as a boarding master as well. So in the early mid-1990s, I went back to Sacred Heart and I worked as a boarding master. So I've been a boarder there and I've worked as a boarding master there looking after fifth formers, right? So I can see both sides of the thing. There is no way that 26th formers can go in after hours to a dorm full of third formers, beat them up, and staff not know. I call bullshit. It is not possible. It certainly was the culture of that school. Just finish this off. There's only another 30 seconds.
To beat up a 13-year-old. He said they arrived and said they wanted to give the boy a hiding.
20 of them.
And Simon said, yes, they could, or they would have turned on him. And he says, I told them, I'll just turn my stereo on so I don't hear. But I could hear over the top of it. And I could hear this boy getting an absolute hiding. And he was crying out for me. And I was supposed to protect him. And I just allowed that to happen. God knows what's happened to him now.
I call bullshit. Yeah. And just think about this. You hear about schools and over in like the UK, you hear about Eton, like these sorts of schools that are prestigious, and they're the leaders of, the financial world in 10, 15 years. They're the ones that go into politicians. That's fucking King's and Auckland Grammar in New Zealand. Now, I'm not speaking to Auckland Grammar. I don't know too much about Auckland Grammar, although I went to St. Peter's for a while as well, which is on the other side of the motorway to Auckland Grammar. But I do know the culture of King's. Those are the leaders of New Zealand in 20 years from now. That was the culture in the 1990s. And I'm speaking to it, I'm testifying to it as a witness, meaning I didn't see it happening in their dorms, but I knew the people it was happening to and who were perpetrating it as well. So I call bullshit on that school. I call bullshit on the staff at that school for not knowing, because you can't not know. I've been in that job at a different school, and I've been a boarder in a school that, thank the good Lord, was fucking good, not like this pile of shit.
Yeah.
Sorry, off you go.
No. Look, I think that's fair. I didn't have that schooling. I went to just a state high school. I didn't stay over, but I mean, you're right. Like for that many students on the move at once, there's no way they could have known. Couldn't have known, I should say.
If I'm fair, let's say something happened one night.
They would have been talking about that through the day. Somebody would have heard something.
This is the thing, like something happened one night and a group of them got away with something, but it was the culture of the school, which means it would have been regular. And I call bullshit that the staff, the teaching, those people did not know. Yeah. Right? It's like, I mean, maybe you don't know this, but for those of you out there of teenagers, your kid will get away with 3 things in a row. By the time they've done the 4th thing, you're like, what the fuck is going on here? You eventually know. If it's the culture of a school, it happens enough that you eventually know. So I call bullshit on that staff, on whoever the principal was at the time, that they can plead ignorance if they try to do that. Susie Fergusson was talking this morning to Christopher Luxon about what to do with New Zealand's health situation, and talking to National about needing more nurses, and asking Mr. Luxon how they were going to get more nurses. Let's have a bit of a listen to this. We can stop along the way if you want to jump in with anything there, George, but this is Susie Fergusson talking to Christopher Luxon primarily about nursing. Honestly, we're not going to go into the bit about tax, but the second part of this interview where she's talking about tax is as good. So maybe you can go and listen to that to yourself off the RNZ website. But right now what we'll just listen to is the part about nurses and nursing and what National would do as a government to get more nurses into our health system.
On the nurses, because the nurses do seem to be a real crunch point here. How would you bring in more nurses, though? Because, you know, if you can get paid more in Australia, why would you come here?
Well, the point, Susie, is that at the moment, yes, there is a worldwide war for talent, no doubt about it, and certainly in the healthcare sector as well. But we're doing this with one hand behind our back because on the one hand, we're saying if you're a doctor, you can come to a fast track immediately to residency. But if you're a nurse or a midwife, you can't. You've got 2 years to wait.
But getting residency doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Luxon. So would you pay the nurses more?
But what it does is it actually means that when we look at Australia, who actually offer nurses, whether they be in Wales or India or South Africa or anywhere else considering coming to their country, they actually have a fast track to residency. We don't have that, and as a result, we're a much less competitive or desirable place for people to come. So that we've got to make sure if we want the best to come, we've actually got to be the best be the best at immigration, and we're not.
But also, they do pay them more. Bottom line. So, are you saying that you wouldn't pay nurses any more money?
What we wouldn't be doing is we wouldn't be spending billions of dollars in a health restructure that's going to...
So here's the Gish Gallop, yeah? She's asked a very direct question. So are you saying you wouldn't be paying the nurses anymore? And this is what happens with a politician, forget who it is, will go into the talking points as to why the other side is bad rather than answering the question. I might even go back a bit so you can hear that question again and have a listen, okay? She asked a really clear and direct question. Listen to the answer.
Wouldn't pay nurses any more money.
What we wouldn't be doing is we wouldn't be spending billions of dollars in a health restructure that's going to mean, and we're going to build another...
Can we focus on the nurses, please? Would you pay them more money or would you not? Simple question.
We would stop spending the money building bureaucracy and management in Wellington. We'd put that money into the front line to make sure we improve services, hospitals, doctors, nurses, and we get them here. But we're 4,000...
I wanted to pause there as well because Mr. Luxon said, and we'd get them here. Right? So what he's talked about is getting nurses here. So he said it again, we're going to get them here. Susie Fergusson is asking again and again and again, is the way you're going to get them here by paying them more? Because if it's just about residency, they can do that in Australia and they get paid more in Australia. So basically she's saying, what's different about New Zealand? How are we going to attract people to New Zealand if they can go elsewhere with a very similar culture, let's be honest, a very similar, well, maybe not similar climate, but a similar kind of country and earn better money that will go further for them. So one of the things that Mr. Luxon just said was, and we'll get them here. In other words, National are saying, we're going to get these nurses here. And Susie Fergusson is going to go back to the point again and again and again. How are you going to get them here?
Nurses short at the moment. And again, a lot of it can be solved by actually opening up our immigration settings, making New Zealand attractive relative to Canada and Australia and other places.
Yeah, but once nurses get here, they'll realise that the cost of living, cost of housing is enormous, won't they? So it actually does matter how much you pay them. So are you undertaking then, if you become leader of the government next year, that you will pay nurses more?
What I'm saying to you very clearly is we're not interested in building bureaucracy and adding 14,000 more bureaucrats into Wellington that hasn't delivered better outcomes for New Zealanders. We're focused on outcomes. We want to make sure that people can see their first specialist in 4 months. We want to make sure that emergency wait times are running at 90%.
Okay.
It
doesn't seem clear whether you would pay nurses more or not. What, though, do you think you're proposing?
I guess that's the one little criticism. It is clear. They're not. Because if they were going to pay them more, he'd say, yes, we're going to pay them more. So I think it is actually clear. Maybe Susie was being generous there by saying it's not clear because we haven't had an answer one way or the other. I think to most of us, it is clear. Because if they were going to pay them more, he'd say, yeah, absolutely, we're going to raise it by 10 or 20%. Yeah, he'd make the statement. So even though he hasn't answered it, I think it still now is clear that National has no intention of paying nurses more to bring them into the country.
Tax cuts would do to the health system funding.
Well, what we're doing, what we're saying very clearly is this government's, had a massive amount of inflation over the last 4 years. It's been up over 12 to 13%. We're saying.
So I cut into that question a bit. So she's asked, what would the tax cuts do to the health system? If anyone wants to know, what would the tax cuts do to the health system? And again, Mr. Luxon I was going to say has no answer for this. Maybe he does have an answer. Maybe he knows exactly what it would do, but he chooses not to answer it.
And just take the tax thresholds up, as you and I have talked about this many times before. It's a really good solution. It's pragmatic. It's sensible. It's not ideological. It's just saying, look, you've had inflation, take the tax thresholds up.
But if you have less coming in the tax take, you have less to spend, don't you?
We can make sure that I'd sooner.
Yes, is the answer to that question. Yes. if we have less coming in the tax, we have less to put back into things like, I don't know, getting nurses. That's actually, I'm helping Mr. Luxon here. I'm answering the question for him. Yes, there is less money in the coffers to pay for things like doctors and nurses.
Have the New Zealand public spending and saving that money rather than giving it to Grant Robertson, who's addicted to spending, going to spend it on a Radio New Zealand TVNZ merger, for example.
But the thing about this here is that under your proposal, thousands of top earners like yourself would get thousands and thousands of dollars as a tax cut. So wouldn't that then pay essentially a chunk of nurses' wages, or to put a chunk more money into the health system instead?
So, Susie, what we're saying is at the moment we've got a government that's just making it up on the fly, a week
Much like Mr. Luxon's doing right now with his answers.
out from the budget, they put a cost of living package together. There was no cost of living crisis then, there was. Now we'll remove half excise tax.
That's not addressing my question, though, Mr. Luxon.
No, listen to me. What I'm saying to you is actually that's Band-Aid economics, and that's not a good long-term solution. All we're saying is we've got a cost of living crisis. The simplest, most easiest thing we can do is inflation adjust tax thresholds and give people back their own money so they can spend it and save it as they see fit.
Okay, so
Now, I actually would like to continue this on. I won't now, just purely for time. But the next part of this interview, and go to RNZ yourself and check it out, is as good as that, if not better, when talking about inflationary tax cuts or giving the money back. And talking about putting more money into education. And she asks very clearly, are you going to match that investment into education to an inflationary level? And he comes back with time and time again, every year that I'm the Prime Minister, we will be putting more into the education system. And she goes, that's not my question. I'm talking about, would you match inflation? Because if you don't match inflation, even if you're putting more in, it's still going backwards. And at no point he says he's going to match inflation. So, okay, so they put in $1 more. He's ticked his promise, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily made a difference to the system. So, I mean, I could stand in applause, but if I do that, you'd see that I'm in my undies, because that's what I do when I'm broadcasting. But it was utterly brilliant. It's an utterly brilliant conversation. Go to RNZ, listen to the end of that about the rest of it. And just to finish off the point that they were making there about tax, what National is saying is we're going to take tax money out of the coffers, out of the storehouse, so to speak, out of the ability for the government to spend it on things like getting more nurses, and we're going to give that $10 a week, $20 a week, in Mr. Luxon's case, $10,000 a week, back to the people so they can get 2 extra coffees or an extra beer on a Friday night, or half a block of cheese. So you'll get half a block of cheese extra a week, and it'll be a 10% cut in the health spending. So I've said it for a long time, there's this concept of putting your money into the storehouse where you'll put a little bit in, the people who are then running it can take it out and can make decisions that we could never add to ourselves. We could never afford and fund, nurses for our local hospitals or anything. But when we put it into a consolidated fund, it can come out of there and pay ways. So when you hear a government talking about tax breaks, although National's scared to use that word, tax cuts, what that's doing is taking less money out of the coffers. And the question that still hasn't been asked is, what cuts are you going to make? I'm going to do one more thing, George. I know you want to jump on this, but I'll also say, do you remember that conversation we had yesterday about Mr. Luxon, who's claiming to be a student of Te Reo, right? And I'm asking people if you've ever heard him in a salutation, a hello or goodbye using Māori. I want to hear from you. And I remembered that as I was listening to that this afternoon. I went, oh, I wonder what Mr. Luxon says at the start of this conversation.
Emergency departments around the country are under strain, and staff shortages mean some health authorities are delaying planned surgeries for weeks. The National Party says Health Minister Andrew Little is dreaming if he thinks that's not a clear indication of a sector in crisis. With us now is the opposition leader, Christopher Luxon. Morena.
Good morning, Susie. How are you today?
I'm well,
Right,
thanks.
so there's one for me, right? No Māori salutation in there from this so-called student of Te Reo. Right, George, I'm sure you've got something you want to offer in here. Are we going to applaud first of all? I'm going to applaud.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Marvellous.
RNZ is a common place for this sort of pushback, right? So yeah, that's awesome to see, and hopefully we get a bit of that going forward. One little thing that I noticed is the language is around addicted to spending is an interesting choice of phrase, right? I think you could sort of read into that quite a bit in how National pick their talking points when it comes to connotations and that sort of thing.
Because being an addict has a very negative connotation, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I didn't really have that much more to add to what you've said.
I mean, didn't Susie do it all though? Honestly, wasn't that exactly what we've been talking about for a couple of months? Please, journalists in New Zealand who have access to these people, don't just let them say their talking points. All you got to do is say how, and that's exactly what she did. How are you going to attract these nurses?
Especially considering that National is going to try and, I mean, among the sort of dog whistling in terms of co-governance or whatever it might be, considering that their main sort of thing is going to be cost of living crisis, then it's going to be easy enough to sort of push them on the how question, and see that really that there's nothing much behind that they might jump to inflation, which is easy enough for them to do.
Yeah, no
but
depth.
Really when it comes to wages or anything like that, there's not much going on. And it reminds us of what Bryce said last night, that really it's just the same old thing, that National, he said to watch out for this sort of talking point in the coming months, where National is able to put the blame on the working class, basically, and wages and that sort of thing, and make their historical constituents happy, the employers of this country, and so forth.
Yeah, and look, I think we've been quite fair. We've said it about Mr. Luxon and also the Prime Minister as well, that if they haven't got policy set for next year, then trying to trap them about policy for next year, whether that be on capital gains tax or whether that be on are you going to sign with ACT, is a bit of a, I mean, it is the kind of trap question, whatever that phrase is. But also, from one of the very first things I think we ever did on this show was talk about Christopher Luxon saying rents have gone up by $50 a week. And no one said, how are you going to bring rents down? Or maybe one person did say, maybe that's how we started it. How are you going to bring rents down? And he had no answer for it. And I firmly believe that if you're making bold claims about how poor the other side is, and I don't care whether this is National or Labour or the Greens or ACT or anyone in between, if you're making claims about how they're doing poorly, you can't explain how you'd do it better, then that's an appropriate hole to be demonstrated in your argument. There's no depth to the argument. Because I think the thing is, as I was saying in that, I think he does know the answer to those questions, but he can't say them because they would undermine his own talking points. Yeah. So I think we all know the answers to those questions. And as I said, maybe Susie was being generous by saying we're unclear on whether you're going to pay nurses anymore. We're not unclear. It may not have been said, but we're not unclear. So
yeah. Well, it's funny considering that you would have heard this line where Luxon says, this is evidence-based policy, the non-existent policy, not ideology based, right? So basically what he's saying there is we're not basing this on, and this is related to our conversation we're about to have, we're not basing this on any principles or anything. We're basing our non-policy on some sort of skewed evidence that I'm not going to get into. All
right, team. Thanks for joining us again for Thursday night. We will catch you again tomorrow night for another best of last one. And then on next Monday, we're back again working live in the studio doing the daily news stories. If you've found us and you've just joined us for the first time, hello, and welcome. It's good to be with you. It's good to share some of our content with you. I think for new people, this week has probably been quite interesting because it's showing it's like our shop front. It's showing our wares. It's showing like what we do and how we do it. We're very relaxed. We're very laid back. We talk about us being a news conversation, not a news show, because as you've seen, especially when I'm with either Chewy or George, we just kind of talk, have a chat. We do have our information lined up, and we do attempt to be very precise in our commentary, but we just kind of chill. It's like, I don't know if you can see, but down here, I've got a fridge and got some drinks and stuff here. It's sort of as if we're in a pub talking about these things over a beer. That's sort of the vibe we're going for. So if you're new, lovely to have you on board. Very much appreciate you being with us, and hopefully you've enjoyed the week. Very quickly, if you want to support us in any other way, being involved in the Patreon would be an easy way for you to do it. Patreon.com/Big Hairy News. We're completely independent at the moment, unless I've signed a massive contract while being on holiday. We're completely independent at the moment, so literally our only source of funding comes through Patreon. We've got 20 or 30 people on board that want to support what we do. As little as $5, it goes through to $250 a month. And other than that, if you don't want to get involved financially, then get involved other ways. Tell people about us, share our commentary, share our clips, go to our Facebook page and like it, and start sharing some of those clips around on FaceTube. Is that what it's called? And other than that, just lovely to have new people on board. Lovely to have you on board. And for all our regulars out there who are still watching now, I appreciate you exponentially. We will see you on Monday night. We'll see all of you on Monday night from 10 p.m. when we go live again. But tomorrow night, we're going to be having a look at Byron Clark and Senna Brown Davis talking about the arrest of Calvin Alp and Hannah Spear. I've got a commentary tomorrow night, which is conspiracy theorists are always wrong, mostly. We're looking at Karen Plunket. If you don't know who Karen Plunket is, it's the alter ego to Sean Plunket. So Sean Plunket is the person who probably lives and breathes as a normal person. Karen Plunket is the person who then gets on the platform and bitches and moans about everything in the world. We're going to look at Louise Wallace thinking fat people are icky, and also Professor Michael Plank joining us tomorrow night on cancelling the COVID traffic light system. All right, that's us. Thanks, guys. We'll see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another best of. Stay safe. Hooroo.